Being the country with the largest landmass in the world no longer provides an absolute security guarantee for its massive borders. Because the supposedly immutable rules of the sky and warfare are being ruthlessly rewritten by autonomous machines that are small in size, but colossal in impact. The most shocking and dramatic example of this new era occurred on that historic night when the Russian Federation fell victim to its own geographical sheer size and arrogance. This unprecedented event, where Putin's defense doctrines completely collapsed, also shook global aviation strategies to their core. It all started when Russia, fearing the ever-expanding flames of the war, chose to keep its rarest fighter jets, such as the Su-57 and Su-34, out of sight. These aircraft were moved a full 1,700 kilometers away from the front line. In fact, the necessity of moving Russia's most precious aircraft behind the Urals was not a situation that emerged suddenly out of nowhere. This forced and frantic migration was the clear result of the pressure Ukraine had gradually escalated over the previous months, directly targeting strategic bases deep within Russian territory. Past attacks on the Su-57s at the Akhtubinsk base in the Astrakhan region in particular had caused alarm bells to ring violently in the dark corridors of Moscow. Panicking after this shocking vulnerability, the Russian command echelon signed off on a highly radical and hasty evacuation decision to protect those last remaining valuable air assets. The valuable fleets in all Western bases relatively close to the front line were immediately dismantled and extracted through midnight operations in recent times. Critical facilities with billion-dollar infrastructures, particularly the Engels strategic bomber base and Akhtubinsk, had now become open targets, veritable death traps for these rare aircraft. The new and permanent destination was the Shagol military airbase, located within the borders of the harsh-climated Chelyabinsk Oblast in the southern Urals region, quite close to the Asian continent. This massive, costly, and complex logistical operation was carried out through a combination of night-running military cargo trains, covered trucks, and direct transfer flights conducted under a radio blackout. The staff's only hope was to definitively distance these special fleets, worth billions of dollars, from Ukraine's long-range missiles and constantly evolving stealth kamikaze drones. However, there was a huge, colossal truth that Russian military intelligence entirely overlooked, experienced technological blindness toward, or was too afraid to report to the upper echelons. From the beginning to the end of this supposedly top-secret transport operation, Ukraine was fully aware of every detail, down to each aircraft's tail number and the apron coordinates where they landed. Secretly moving such a massive fleet in the transparent and digital battlefield of the modern era, let alone aircraft with massive radar signatures like the Su-57, was already a technically impossible pipe dream. Because Ukraine's cyber intelligence units had quietly deciphered the unusual activity and military cargo routes on the Russian railway networks weeks in advance. Real-time satellite telemetry data merged flawlessly with encrypted messages sent from the field by deep-cover local partisans. That distant Shagol base, the new home of the Su-57s and the bomber role Su-34s, had already been marked on the target boards of the Ukrainian staff before the plane's wheels even touched the ground. It was known exactly how many aircraft had been transported to the Shagol airbase. Right after these critical intelligence confirmations, the historic button that radically changed the course of the war was pressed on the night of April 25, 2026. The Ukrainian unmanned systems forces ruthlessly and flawlessly targeted the Shagol airbase, which was assumed to be absolutely safe, a full 1,700 kilometers away from its borders. The attack took place in pitch darkness at that deep, cold, and secret military facility in the eastern coordinates, very close to Russia's Asian borders. For this massive operation, the Ukrainian army deployed fleets of long-range one-way attack drones, those terrifying kamikaze UAVs, developed from scratch with its own engineering. Lyuti and similar, yet unnamed state-of-the-art autonomous models were the silent, brazen protagonists in the sky of this unique and daring operation. Carrying highly destructive explosive warheads of roughly 100 kilograms, these drones were absolutely not ordinary remote-controlled commercial devices or simple knockoffs. They were smart death machines, equipped with advanced AI-supported optical terrain recognition systems, capable of finding their way even if the satellite connection was lost. The massive layers of electronic warfare and GPS signal jammers that Russia boasted about and spent billions of rubles on were not enough to blind these machines autonomously locked onto their targets. Thanks to their extraordinary fuel efficiency, the Ukrainian drones stayed airborne for more than 10 hours, gliding like ghosts deep within Russian airspace, skimming the treetops. The first center of the Unmanned Systems Forces, the world's first official drone army, and the legendary Magyar's Birds Brigade were the architects of this historic strike. In the final terminal phase, the drones suddenly ascended and dove flawlessly at a deadly angle into those billion-dollar targets lying side by side on the Shagol aprons. The scene that emerged at dawn on the morning of the attack was, in every sense of the word, an irreversible, devastating strategic nightmare turned into reality for the Kremlin leadership. On May 1, 2026, the Ukrainian General Staff officially and proudly announced the decisive and overwhelming results of this staggering deep strike operation to the entire world. Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Robert Magyar Brovdy openly laid bare, one by one and in a mocking tone, the extent of the damage the Russians were desperately trying to hide with massive tarpaulins. Exactly 4 vitally important Russian fighter jets, parked on those supposedly impenetrable and sheltered aprons of the Urals, took direct hits and were severely damaged. The toll of the attack was so heavy that special inspectors and high-level aviation engineers had to be dispatched from Moscow to the region for damage assessment. Leaked high-resolution satellite imagery clearly and ruthlessly documented this colossal defeat that the Kremlin was trying to cover up. Those massive damaged aircraft had been hastily towed by tractors to completely unrelated remote corners of the apron, in hopes of hiding them from the next surveillance pass of the Ukrainian satellites. So, what did the Russian Air Force actually lose after this stunning attack operation? The strategic value of these aircraft, which Ukraine struck right in the heart of the enemy, a full 1,700 kilometers away while taking so many risks, was quite literally priceless for Russia. These aircraft meant much more than ordinary and easily reproducible machines on the battlefield. They were the sources of national prestige for the Russian defense industry. In particular, the Su-57 Felon, which was among the struck aircraft, was the absolute apple of the eye of Russian aviation engineering, the pinnacle of billions of dollars worth of long R&D efforts. As the sole and strongest representative of Russia's 5th-generation stealth fighter jet concept, these jets were designed as an answer to American dominance in the skies. Costing between $100 and $120 million per unit, depending on the sensitive avionics equipment inside, these superjets were practically massive flying fortunes. Capable of a terrifying speed like Mach 2, meaning the ability to fly twice as fast as sound, these machines were Russia's most prestigious export trump card to offer to foreign buyers like India and the Middle East. With their advanced N036 Belka Active Electronically Scanned Array Radar System, DIRCM laser countermeasures, and unmatched super maneuverability, they were being marketed to the global market as the invincible kings of the sky on paper. Thanks to the R-37M long-range air-to-air missiles they secretly carried within their fuselage, they were specially designed to destroy their prey from very long distances without being detected by enemy radars. On the other hand, the Su-34 fullback fighter bombers, which were targeted by drones on the wide aprons of the Shagol base, represented a very different and ruthless face of the war. Valued between roughly $35 and $50 million, these jets were not in the showcase of the war, but were the tirelessly working heavy laborers bearing its true, dirty, and bloody burden. With a 2-person crew sitting side by side and capable of carrying over 8 tons of weapon payload, these massive aircraft almost resembled flying tanks with their aerodynamic structure. It was directly these jets that ruthlessly pounded the defensive positions in the east and south of Ukraine with massive 3-ton heavy glide bombs, disrupting the balance of the front. Because the production of the Su-57 aircraft was progressing extremely slowly, inconsistently, and painfully right from the start due to the microchip embargoes and heavy technological sanctions imposed by the West. As of May 2026, the total number of Su-57s produced, including those first 10 prototypes used for testing years ago, was stuck between merely 30 and 42. The number of operationally ready Su-57s, meaning those that had passed all tests and possessed the equipment to enter hot combat directly, was at an extremely critical threshold, well below 30. These jets were so expensive the import substitution production of their electronic equipment was so difficult, and their numbers were so scarce that the Russian command echelon never dared to put them into active combat over Ukrainian air defenses. They kept them behind the front lines so as not to become targets for Patriot batteries, using them only in completely risk-free missions, such as firing standoff cruise missiles from afar or conducting radar system tests in safe zones. The Su-34 fleet, bearing the operational load, had been constantly and heavily depleting since the beginning of the war against Ukraine's increasingly intensifying modern air defense systems supported by artificial intelligence. According to verified visual evidence from Ukrainian intelligence, at least 41 aircraft from this massive fleet, which had around 140 active planes in the first days of the invasion, had been definitively hit and shot down in balls of fire. The approximately 100 Su-34s that Russia barely had left were flying right in the heart of a constant war of attrition, with the fear of suffering a new loss every time they took to the sky. This is exactly why that devastating attack at the Shagol airbase was not a simple tactical incident, consisting merely of the burning of a few piles of metal. This unique and audacious military success was the greatest manifesto that Russia's famous tactic of smuggling valuable aircraft to the Urals had gone bankrupt in a definitive, clear, and irreversible way. The Kremlin leadership had now learned very bitterly that it could not protect even its most valuable, most expensive military assets, which would perhaps take decades to replace, from the increasingly lengthening deadly arms of Ukraine. The myth of the untouchable rear front, which Russian generals had relied upon the most, built their strategies on, and convinced the public of since the beginning of the war, collapsed forever in flames on the night of April 25th amidst the buzzing of drone engines. This massive leap that Ukraine achieved in military technology entirely with its own engineers had turned into a strategic asymmetric imbalance that spanned continents, affecting not just the clashes on the front line. The Lyuti, Bober, and the latest generation Rodur-type autonomous kamikaze drones were ruthlessly and unilaterally rewriting all the classic and familiar rules of aerial warfare that had been taught in schools for decades. The massive, endless, winter-frozen territorial integrity of European Russia was no longer an inaccessible fortress for the Ukrainian armed forces. It had turned into an open, completely defenseless, massive hunting ground. Those massive strategic Tu-95 and supersonic Tu-160 nuclear bombers hibernating at the Engels base were no longer safe in any way, at any hour, or in any hangar. Those top-secret weapon testing centers in Akhtubinsk, the Olenya base on the Kola Peninsula, and the operational tactical fleets in Mozdok were right in the middle of a state of constant alert, a permanent and gnawing paranoia. Main hubs forming the entire railway logistics heart of the war, like Voronezh, Rostov, and Kursk, were fearfully awaiting a deadly artificial intelligence blow that could silently descend from the sky at any moment. Not only military air bases, but even the giant strategic ammunition depots carved into the mountains around Yekaterinburg and the massive fuel refineries financing the country in western Siberia were now definitively within the range of Ukrainian missiles. Because this asymmetric warfare capacity, which Ukraine was producing at a mind-boggling speed in underground facilities, was definitively and irreversibly changing the destiny of the war, according to Western military strategy experts. With relatively very low-cost smart drones priced in the tens of thousands of dollars, easily mass-produced, and capable of flying in swarms, the giant Russian air power built over decades with budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars was being slowly but surely depleted. Although Russia tried to exert primitive ground pressure on the front line with massive artillery barrages and human wave tactics, the modern rear-front security and logistical veins feeding that massive war machine had been completely paralyzed. This massive strategic destruction was not just a military vulnerability experienced on the field for Moscow, but also an impossible-to-overcome economic and prestige loss while writhing under global sanctions. Glide bomb operations, the Russian army's most effective and deadly weapon in breaching Ukrainian positions, had to slow down due to increasing aircraft losses and maintenance difficulties. Shifting those few remaining intact aircraft much deeper into Siberia to makeshift bases lacking personnel and logistical infrastructure, just to escape Ukrainian range, would completely reset their daily operational efficiency.
शहरी लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमा सा हूँ तुझ में, मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या। दिल की है पुकार मेरी, दाड़ों की रही है मेरे आंखों के सामने तू वैसे की रही है। तेरी यादों के सफर में कोई गुस्सा नहीं हो, पूरी तुझसे कितनी तेरी तारीफों से रुकता नहीं। शाही लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमा सा हूँ तुझ में, मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या।
मुझे सामने पाँव में हम खड़े हैं देखा कई राहों में, तू तो आके फिर से तू भी थाम ले, हम भी हाथों में तेरे ही नामों के अभी एग्जाम ले, करने वालों में तेरे रहे हिसाब, ये आंखों में रहे हैं तेरे